Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Television. This is the show where you and I both get to see authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and beyond. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and it's great to have you with us today. We're excited today because our guest is a highly acclaimed author, young lady named Nora Shalaway Carpenter. Now, I want you to listen to this. This is an amazing bio. She's a graduate of Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA program in writing for children and young adults. She is the author of the YA contemporary novel, The Edge of Anything, which won a Best Book Award from Kirkus Reviews in 2020. She's the contributing editor to Rural Voices, 15 Authors Challenging Assumptions About Small Town America, which is what we're going to talk about today. That was an NPR Best Book of 2020. Country Living Magazine's Front Porch Book Club selection, and a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection. It also just recently was nominated as a Young Adult Library Services Association's Best Fiction Adult for 2022. It also won 2 Nautilus Awards, a gold for mid-grade fiction, and the overall best of mid-grade and YA fiction. The Nautilus Awards are to celebrate and honor books that support conscious living and green values, high-level wellness, positive social change and social justice, and spiritual growth. Previous winners, get this, include Barbara Kingsolver, Louise Edrick, Barry Lopez, Deepak Chopra, Bishop Tutu, Judy Collins, Marianne Williamson, and the Dalai Lama. This is quite a list of accomplishments. And before she wrote those books, she worked as the associate editor of Wonderful West Virginia magazine. She is originally from rural West Virginia, and she currently lives in Asheville, North Carolina with her husband, 3 young children, and the world's most patient dog and cat. So thank you so much for being with us. These are wonderful awards. I'm just highly impressed with your work. But I got to tell you, when I read the book, it didn't even occur to me that this was a YA book.
I'm glad. That's good.
It seemed so, I don't know, some of the stories seem to deal with such complex problems in their lives that adults have dealt with as well. How did you marry those two two thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I'll say is that young adult literature has really come a long way since 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when there were only certain things that were written about. It's really allowed, teenagers, I think we sometimes forget, have just as complex emotional lives and are dealing with really hard situations in their day-to-day lives as adults are, right? And we can all kind of, I think we can all really kind of remember that time of transition because so much is happening in your life. And specifically with this book, when I was talking to other authors that were rural like me or had grown up rural, we all had these really strong memories from our young adult years of being stereotyped because of where we're from. And as like, if you read the book and the stories, you'll see, but some of us kind of had to, or learn to like hide where we were from, some of us always celebrated it and got really angry at people. Some of us felt a lot of shame, but always it was kind of, we took kind of like what society was saying about rural people, and it really impacted us as young adults, and we carried that into adulthood. And so that's why I really wanted to focus on that pivotal time, because I think it continues to happen today. And of course, like you said, it happens. I feel like anyone that lives in any rural area today, no matter what your age is, you've probably dealt with a lot of similar things as in these stories. And so it just seemed like I wanted to make it accessible to younger readers, because even, a 14-year-old could read this book, no problem, but also, an 80-year-old could read the book and identify with some of these things. So it just seemed like this was the best way to make it widely accessible, as widely accessible as possible.
Yeah, you talk about that in your foreword, and I think that's really important to read. Even as an adult, I lived in Georgia for a while, and I can remember going to a meeting one time, and I'm not from rural Appalachia, but Huntington is still right smack dab in the center.
Right.
Having some crack made about hillbillies or West Virginians, it's the usual. And you always get this, oh, I have a cousin in Roanoke business.
Right.
People don't even know we're a state. So,
it's amazing. It always happens.
Yeah. But it was interesting to me to find that I sort of expected when I looked at the cover and I recognized what you were writing about, that all of the stories would be about rural Appalachia. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that you, as you say, I think in the foreword, that boundary of rural, or that definition, got really fuzzy, because it's the truth in Alaska and Utah and all over the place. Was this a conscious decision when you started pulling these stories together?
Absolutely. Yes. I wanted, because it would be a different book, right? If it was just Appalachian stories. I mean, because Appalachia, just like any other part of the country, is rich with its own history. And so it would be filled with different themes. Some of the stories have those themes, but not all of them, like you say, because there's a story set in Alaska, there's stories from all over the country. And if I had been able to, I would have had one from every state, but of course the book would have been volumes and volumes. So that just wasn't possible. So we tried to, I tried to find writers that represented different pockets of rural in the United States, that were different enough from each other, that even in some of the stories where I was reading them and I was like, oh, I didn't know about this rodeo queening, that this is a thing, in Utah, like I had no idea. And I'm rural, but like that is such a different version of rural, and people, I think when you, especially today, like when you're watching popular media or something and someone says rural, I think the immediate image that comes to mind is that stereotype of like a Southern hillbilly, like with no teeth and like, have like a distorted accent that like I've never even heard anyone speak that way. Like accents are beautiful and they're never like how they're represented on popular media. So it was definitely a very conscious decision, not only to make it diverse geographically, but also just in the types of stories that people were writing about, and the things that their characters were struggling with.
Mm-hmm. So you say it was not just geography, but it's also ethnically diverse.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, yes.
And you've got at least one gay story in there too. So
oh yeah, there's a number of queer stories in the book, and that's so anytime you are so I feel like as much of a challenge as I had in my life dealing with rural stereotypes, you then anybody that has like another subset of identity, be it gender, queer, socioeconomic, because we have some stories that are about really, really poor places, really poor families, and other stories that are the characters are well off, because that's different too. So, and that really changes a person's experience no matter where you live, as well as the race of the writer itself. And so I think that it's very important because, again, if you would ask, I would say the random person on the street to be like, hey, describe a person from rural America, I bet the overwhelming response would be that person is white. And that is erasing, and unfortunately, like erasing a lot of diversity that exists in all rural communities, not just Appalachia, but all over the United States. And so I definitely really wanted to highlight that it's not just a bunch of white people here, like there are so many more. And it's rich. Rural places are rich, not with just um, white stories, and although that's what kind of is told all the time, but there's all these other subcultures that have beautiful stories to tell too.
I think the word other is what stands out here, is that everybody has that feeling that they're somehow other than the mainstream, and that
Mhm.
rural is what makes them other. And I
Mhm.
think the stories are just beautiful.
Oh, I'm so glad.
How did you choose these particular 15 authors?
So that's a good question because it was a little tricky actually. So some of them I knew personally because, like you said, I went to graduate school at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and so I had a lot of connections to people through there. So like Tirza Price, Monica Rowe, Shamile Mendez, Rob Costello, Shay Harris, those people also went to VCFA, and I knew them and I could reach out to them and be like, hey,
Mhm.
is this something that you'd be interested in doing? Vita Bybee, there's actually a lot of connections in here, but then it got a little tricky because of what we talked about, because of kind of having that rural identity sometimes makes people think less of you. Unfortunately, a lot of people hide that. And so when I was trying to find rural authors from
Mhm.
rural YA authors from different parts of the country, it would be like, well, where does this person live? And it gets kind of weird when you're like trying to research like how rural are you. So a lot of it was by word of mouth, like people that I knew. I would ask, hey, do you have any rural, friends, rural writer friends, people that you really enjoy their
Mhm.
storytelling, you can recommend to me. So that was how, like with Nazugrak Rainey Hobson, for instance, our Alaskan writer, she was recommended by Cynthia Leidig Smith, who's a really wonderful YA author. And so it was kind of like that, like word of mouth, the people I knew, and then word of mouth. But I think with any anthology, nailing down the contributor list is always the trickiest part because people have to want to be involved, but then it also has to fit in their time schedule, right? Because you have the book coming out in a certain time and they have to be able to write a story, and then we have to do revisions, and it's just like this whole thing. So yeah, so some people aren't fans of writing for anthologies. I really like them. But they are challenging to fit all the pieces together for sure.
So did they, were all the stories written for the anthology, or did any of them come from something that they had written and maybe had published in a journal of some kind?
So none of the stories were previously published.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a lot of them. It's funny because this question was asked on a panel with some of the authors from Rural Voices when the book first came out. And so a number of people had stories in mind already, or like they'd been like, oh, I'd really kind of like to write about this part of my life, but I don't really have a reason to write about it right now. So that was cool because Rural Voices gave them a place that they knew it was going to be published, right? So they could be like, oh yeah, I have a story that I've been wanting to tell, so I'm going to write it for
That's
this.
good. That's
Or
good.
I think there were a couple, maybe two stories that had already been started, like the writers were just kind of writing them because, and they were like, oh, this is a perfect fit, so I'll go ahead, submit it for here. So that was really neat how it all came together.
The other thing is, first of all, you define rural as a town or a location of 10,000 population or less
Mhm.
that is a certain distance from a major urban center.
Yep.
Um, that's, I guess, is that your definition, or is that one that somehow
So it's pretty
fit the
close.
criteria?
Yeah, it's pretty close to what rural libraries define themselves
Ah,
as.
okay.
That's kind of how I found it because it was amazing. In fact, there were people that wanted to be in the book that they just didn't fit that definition, right? But I had to have some kind of definition
Yeah.
because rural is so different, and because like you could maybe be close to like a big city, but if there's like close miles wise, but if there's like a mountain between you and that city, you're living a very different kind of lifestyle than
Yeah.
someone that's living in the city center. So you're rural, even though you're closer.
Right.
So that was definitely tricky. And that took me a little bit of time to go back and forth kind of with my editor, and be like, okay, let's really figure out how we're going to define rural. And so that was really helpful that the rural libraries had a definition that I was able to just tweak a little bit.
The other thing that I found interesting about the book, besides the wonderful stories, is that it's an eclectic collection of both poetry, even graphic stories,
Hmm.
short stories, and essays. Was that on purpose as well?
Absolutely. Yes. We definitely reached out to people that write different kinds of genres. Because I think, the cool thing about anthologies is that, well, there's a couple things. One is that short stories or short graphic shorts, they can be devoured so quickly, right? Like, and especially today when everyone's so short on time, you can just sit down and you can read a short story start to finish, and you can feel like, oh, I've read a whole story. But not everybody connects with the same kind of storytelling. Like some people really just love regular prose fiction. Other people are very visual and like graphic short. Some people are more into poetry, and some people prefer nonfiction. So I wanted to make sure, or I wanted to do my best to find that, I don't expect everyone to connect with every single story in the anthology. That would be like, surprising. But I wanted there to be something there that every person, no matter where you're from, no matter if you're rural or not, that every reader could be like, yeah, I like this. This is interesting to me. I've learned something, or I see myself reflected in these pages. So yeah, really offering just diversity any way I could get it. I would definitely do that on purpose.
It's interesting. There were many of them that I liked a lot, but I particularly loved Home. And I'm not particularly a poetry reader, but the images in that are just, they're so unusual
Hmm.
for how somebody defines home, and yet they're so perfect. Tell us
Yeah,
a little bit about that story or that poem and that author.
sure. So the author of Home is Ashley Hope Perez, and she won a Prince honor actually for her novel Out of Darkness. So you could check that out. She's a wonderful writer, and she's also a professor at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, I guess. And yeah, when she first proposed that to me, I was like, sure, because she's not known for her poetry. She usually writes prose. But she was like, I want to write about this, experience. And I think it's just going to come out in this way. And I was like, sure, let's just do it. And it came out so beautifully. And I mean, it's sad. It's a sad story at parts. It's ultimately hopeful and very beautiful the whole way through. Um, but it's not either a traditional like poem. I think when
Yeah,
people
it's
hear the
not.
word poetry, right? I think a lot of people are like Shakespearean sonnets, just totally not at all. Not close. It's more just like little snippets of moments in time. And what she did was, instead of having like whole paragraphs put together to make one story, she just had like two lines that would show a snapshot, almost like you were looking at a bunch of pictures, like if you were going through a scrapbook.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it just came together so beautifully. And 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 yeah, I think that is one a lot of young readers do connect with verse novels and poems, because there's more white space and it's a little bit easier to read too. So yeah, I was really happy with how that one turned out.
I also liked the fact that you used the author's profiles in the back.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that was helpful to get kind of maybe a better understanding of their story and why they wrote what they wrote. Um, was that intentional from the beginning, or was that an editorial decision?
Nope, that was intentional from the beginning. I actually had that in my when my agent submitted the proposal for Rural Voices, that was in there, that I wanted to have each author submit an author anecdote. And originally in my version, I was thinking it would come like between the stories. So you would have like the story, and then you'd have the author anecdote, and then the story and author anecdote. And um it didn't work as well that way for whatever reason. I think because like some of the stories ended up using some themes in the anecdotes, and you didn't want to like give those away, or I think you want space for the reader to kind of digest a story and be like, oh, I get what it's about. Like I understand the themes, and kind of have their own takeaway before you're reading what the writer was thinking.
Right. Right.
So then that was an editorial decision to move them to the end. But we always plan to have them. And my editor was always on board with that, which was really nice.
That's great. You've also written a novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
At
Yeah.
least one. Or you got anything else in the works?
I do. So I actually have another anthology coming out with Candlewick, and it's not coming out until 2023 because that's how books work,
Yeah.
as you know. But it's called Absolutely Normal, and it is a collection of 17 different authors, and it is stories that focus on a character that has some kind of mental health struggles. So some of the characters have OCD, some of them have depression, some of them have suicidal ideation, like these kind of themes, but the stories aren't about that. They're just about a character who happens to struggle with mental health. Because I think, mental health has always been a big thing, but I think since COVID too, so many more people are starting to see like, wow, like we need to take this seriously, right? Like it is just as big a concern as physical health. And so it was really important for me. And all of the authors in the anthology struggle with whatever mental health challenge the protagonist struggles with. So that's really cool too. So that readers can see like, oh, this person has this struggle, but they're also a successful author, and here's how they go through it. So, and then I'm working on another fiction novel, which I can't talk about it yet because it's not like official. So
Yeah, I understand. What's your writing regime? Do you write every day?
so I have 3 young children, ages
Right.
ages 3 to 9. So I try to write Monday to Friday because my 2 older ones are in school and my little one goes to preschool. Now summertime, that gets thrown off. So I don't even like want to think about that, but I do try to write while they're in school. Weekends is family time, but I really think, and I do have people ask me that all the time, like, how do you manage to do anything like as a mom with young children and working mom? And it is difficult for sure. And I think writer moms stick together for a reason because, you need to have someone constantly be like, you can do it. And I had to get up at 4 a.m. to write too, and all this stuff. And you just find ways to make it happen. But even if you can write for 20 minutes a day, that's better than 0 minutes a day, because eventually those 20 minutes will add up into a book.
Do you like the process of editing better than actually writing?
I like the process of revising better than drafting.
Wow.
Yep. So I am one of those people that, I like writing, like just writing on the blank page if I'm in the zone, but sometimes I have always this nagging fear of like it's not good enough, it's not perfect enough. And I'm constantly always fighting perfectionism. And that's the whole point of a first draft, right? Is to not be perfect. It's just to get the story out there. And so that's what I struggle with. And so I have like little notes to myself actually in my office that are just like, it doesn't matter. Like just write a bad story. It's fine. You just have to get the words on there. And then once I have the whole story down, no matter, even if even if it's like terrible to me, I'm like, it doesn't matter. I have all the elements in place and now I can go back and I can make it beautiful, and I can revise it multiple times. And so that's the fun of it for me.
That's interesting. It's not everybody is like that.
No, definitely not.
Because a lot of us dread that editing process, that revision process.
I think that is one of one of the things about like going to school for writing, like getting a master's of fine arts in writing, is that you're forced to revise so much that you just kind of like get used to.
Yeah. What inspired you to do that? What inspired you? I know you graduated from Marshall University.
Yes, I did.
You have professors there. Did you study English and creative writing there?
So I studied English literature and classical studies, actually.
Wow. So you must know Charles Lloyd.
I did. I love Charles Lloyd. Oh my gosh.
Friend
Yes.
of mine.
Oh my gosh. Yes. He was, oh man. Some of
We're in a
my
writing
favorite
group.
classes were his.
We're in a writing group together.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This just makes me happy.
So in the English classes, you took literature, so it wasn't really creative writing.
No, and that's interesting because I on purpose didn't take creative writing, because at that point of my life I was like afraid of being a writer. I had written a bunch as a teenager and as a young person, and then when I got to school, I think there was this fear of like, well, I can't just be a writer. I have to like be able to support myself. What if I write stuff that doesn't sell, you know? So I had it in my mind. I was like, well, I could be a professor. I could teach writing or teach literature. And I loved all my classes. I loved that. But I after undergrad, after Marshall, I actually did 1 year in just a regular master's literature program at American. And I was a teaching assistant there for a wonderful professor. And I loved the teaching part of it, but there was so much else of being a professor that I really didn't like. And I was like, is this like really what it's like? Like, is this what you have to do?
Writing term papers.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, I think maybe I'm on the wrong path. And then also I kind of got like a real wake up call, because a lot of my friends were in the creative writing program at that school, and I was always jealous of them. Like they were always telling me what they were doing and like all their like getting to write their stories, and I was like, oh, I want to be doing that. And so then I kind of had to like take a step back and be like, okay, what do you actually want to do in life? And it was one of those things where you can probably identify this, like, I think writing is a calling, right? You feel like called to write. And I just was. And so I started going to conferences, and then I found out about the VCFA program. And it was definitely kind of like a leap off a cliff, where I was like, well, I guess I'll just try this.
Yeah, good for you. Well, it sounds to me like it's worked out very well.
Thank you.
How do folks get hold of your books?
Oh yeah. So you
The
can order,
usual way?
sorry?
The usual way?
Yeah, the usual way. They're available at any place that sells books. You can order them online at Amazon. Support your local indie bookshop. That's what we hope for sure. But yeah, anywhere.
That sounds good. Just one quick last question, I guess. Did you have a favorite story in the anthology besides your own?
I can't play favorites.
Okay.
People always ask me that, and I'm like, I can't just pick one other person's story. So no, I mean, in a way, they're kind of like, I have a connection to all of them, right? Because I edited and all of them, and
Like your children, you love them all.
exactly, right? Like they all have their own little things, and it's very cool to see them grow, like just like kids do, like from what they were as their first draft to what they are in publication. So I am very proud of all of them.
Are any of the authors in the second anthology repeats from the first one?
They are not, and that is on purpose. That is
Interesting.
that was a piece of that was a piece of advice I'd gotten from other people that do anthologies, is to not repeat authors.
Yep. And then I guess you had some word of mouth connections with those people too. I can't imagine just putting out a request for proposals.
No.
Have some connection to the authors.
No, you would get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mostly, like unpublished people. It would be very, very difficult to sort through. Okay. So no, I had a pretty clear, like, this is who I want in the anthology. And this is, and all the people that we asked, were all people that had spoken publicly about mental health or written about it in previous work. So it's nobody that, like, we're not asking someone to, identify that they have some kind of mental health struggle.
You
Like,
knew.
right, exactly. So these are all people that are comfortable talking about it in public.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and there are quite a few of them in the writing community, as you can imagine.
This
So,
has been a
yeah.
wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a great
Thank you for
pleasure to
having me.
meet you and talk to you and hear about your book and your writing life. And we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.